Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk.
U.S. President Joe Biden reacting to the United States Supreme Court ruling that overturns the landmark Roe versus Wade decision, ending federal abortion rights. Hello, I'm Arnold Snyder, and this is The Heat. The United States Supreme Court has delivered a massive blow to women's rights in the United States. Millions of women across the country will lose their right to an abortion after the court overturned an almost 50-year-old ruling known as Roe v. Wade. For more, let's bring in CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King. He's live at the United States Supreme Court. Nathan, shortly after this decision was announced, in fact, even before it was announced, there were people gathering outside the court. There are demonstrations there. What's going on?
Yeah, I can tell you, Anand, this whole place has been locked off since the leak of that potential ruling came out, what was it, 6 weeks ago or so. There's been fencing all around the Supreme Court, just basically suggesting that the febrile atmosphere that we've had over this momentous decision was going to come down. I can tell you, we've just moved a little bit away from the crowd because there's this pro-lifer really giving a speech and being sort of shouted down. But the atmosphere here generally is a majority of supporters of Roe v. Wade, and they're very angry with the Conservative majority. Now, that was a 6-3 majority vote. All three of Trump's Supreme Court nominees voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. And essentially what it does was get rid of the constitutional right federally to access to abortion. So this essentially what it does is it throws it to the states. Now, as you know, many conservative states have already got very restrictive abortion laws, but on the basis of this ruling, 3 states immediately triggered laws that banned abortion. When all is said and done in the next few weeks, we reckon around 26 states in the United States will have a ban on abortion. Now, about 13, 14 will try and increase those rights or at least keep them. But remember, you can travel freely in between the United States, so it's going to be a bit of a legal mess. But I can tell you, we knew this was coming because of the leak, but some people really hoped this day wouldn't come. And I can tell you, very liberal areas of people very angry at the Supreme Court. They feel that there has been a reversal for women's rights in this country handed down today, and they vowed to protest for many days to come.
So, Nathan, as we can see, emotions are running very high, but what are the political implications of this decision?
Well, the political implications have been drawn over the last few decades. This is definitely a win, isn't it, for Conservatives? A win for Donald Trump, too, who in one term as president elected was able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. But the battle lines, I mean, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Democrat, said, look, women got to go out and vote in November. And Joe Biden himself expressing deep remorse at this ruling. Can see this as a sort of rallying cry for Democrats across the country who, let's face it, on these cultural war issues, as you like, as often and as deeply as conservatives. Let's take a listen.
It was 3 justices named by one president, Donald Trump, who were the core of today's decision to upend the scales of justice and eliminate a fundamental right for women in this country. Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realization of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court, in my view.
Now, what's going to be the effect? Well, Democrats do galvanize their base for November elections. They might hold on to the House of Representatives, which is across the street from the Supreme Court here, maybe the Senate as well. However, if, for example, it went to Republicans, the presidency was to change hands in 3 years' time, there's going to be a big push, I can tell you, amongst the Conservative base for a national ban on abortion to pass through Congress. So even though this landmark ruling, Roe v. Wade, has been overturned, you can expect Conservatives to want to go even further, and Liberals to try and protect the rights, at least in the states that grant abortions, and also women who want to get abortions to travel from red states to blue states or pro-abortion states so they can get these treatments. The other thing, of course, is what happens to the Supreme Court. It is really conservative at the moment, doesn't necessarily reflect the majority of the will of the people as well. So it is a big mess. This country, as we know, is divided on political lines, cultural lines. This decision, very much in tune with that, Anand.
Thanks, Nathan. That's Nathan King at the United States Supreme Court. Well, to discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Reston in Virginia is Reena Shah. She is the CEO of Relax Strategies, a political and strategic communications firm. Here in Washington, D.C. is the rest of our panel. Malik Abdul is a Republican strategist. Joseph Williams is a former U.S. News and World Report senior editor. And Eleanor Clift is a political columnist for The Daily Beast. Welcome to all of you. Eleanor, let me start with you. This law allowing for abortion rights across the country federally has been in place for almost 50 years. Now we have had 6 justices in the United States Supreme Court voting to overturn it. As we heard the president say, President Biden, that is, just a moment ago, this has been a long time in the making. How did we get to this point?
It was a concerted political effort on the part of the conservative right in this country. And Roe wasn't really all that controversial when it was first handed down in 1973. The Southern Baptist Church approved it. Then Governor Ronald Reagan had signed a progressive abortion law in California. And the right was looking for a issue that would motivate Republicans that would have a higher moral standard than to oppose desegregation. At the time, the right was really upset about the fact that religious universities like Bob Jones were being denied tax exemption. And so they cast about for an issue, and they settled on abortion access. And it wasn't until really Reagan in 1980 at his convention that it was enshrined in the Republican platform. So it's taken a while to get this heavily politicized. And at the same time, the country has adjusted to Roe. The number of abortions has been going down. Most states have regulations in place. There's no truth to the charge that's often made that Democrats support abortion up until the moment of birth. Vast majority of abortions occur in that first 3-month period, which is what Roe established. So I think now the right has won. Whether that they're going to be comfortable with that victory remains to be seen, because the extremism has now been put right in front of the American people. Clarence Thomas, Justice, who wrote the opinion, he has even speculated that other rights, like the right to contraception, the right to same-sex marriage, and even intermarriage, could be scrutinized. And so they can't help themselves. They're going to run into a lot of problems now, how to enforce this. They're going to meet a lot of resistance. And what the political implications are, I really don't know. But it feels like the political winds of change suddenly turned into a tornado.
Eleanor, what about the perception of the court as an independent arbiter of justice? The court is supposedly above the political fray, a dispassionate dispenser of justice. But, you know, if we look at some of the commentaries that we've been hearing today, most people say that this was a political decision.
Their credibility is in shreds, because it's not only this decision, but a decision yesterday about gun rights and an expected decision about climate change are also way out of step with where the American people are. American people support Roe by upwards of 60%. They support regulation of guns by 90%. So the court is really out of step. And President Biden usually doesn't like to mention former President Trump's name. Went out of his way to point out that 3 of the conservative justices were appointed by former President Trump. And 2 of those seats, Democrats regard as stolen because they fiddled with the rules in the Senate in order to get them confirmed. It's a lot of anger about the court and its current makeup.
Rena Shah, when the initial Roe versus Wade ruling was handed down in 1973, all the justices on the court at that time were men. In this instance, there are 3 women on the court, and one of them, Amy Coney Barrett, voted with the majority to overturn this ruling. How will this latest decision by the court impact women across America?
Well, women who, of course, want the right to do what they want to do with their body, reproductive rights, didn't think they were on the line in our lifetimes. Obviously, we're where we are. It felt really fast to a great many American women. But the segment of American women that are anti-abortion should not be discounted. I'm not one of them, but I made my career in Republican politics, particularly in the U.S. House of Representatives, when I saw that public opinion really was on the side of Roe. Like Eleanor mentioned, upwards of 60% of Americans support Roe. They didn't want this overturned. Now, of course, a great many American adults wanted some type of restrictions on abortions. But what it's done now to American women is made us realize that where you live matters. And so all elections are local, as most of the political strategists like to remind folks, all year round. But what this has done for those who felt like this decision has really made life scary, for whether it's herself or for her peers, it's the type of decision that makes you wonder, what does this open the door for? But beyond that, let's think about November here. The timing of this is also quite interesting, but because the political ramifications are going to be huge, but also legal ramifications are huge. And let's not forget the trigger laws in some 13 states. We know that laws were triggered today in West Virginia and Arkansas. Immediately, any woman that was scheduled for an abortion after the Supreme Court passed down its decision, those appointments were canceled. So this is a really unfortunate time for those of us who are pro-choice for other women. I always say I'm anti-abortion for myself, but pro-choice for other women. I am nervously standing by because this court, we know, is an activist court now.
You said a moment ago, Rena, that there are huge legal implications. Very briefly, what are those legal implications?
Well, particularly, this is sort of uncharted territory in the modern era. I think in the state courts, we'll see a lot of new stuff come up, particularly governors. Governor Charlie Baker of Massachusetts has already said, now he's a Republican governor, known to be very moderate. He's already said that he's not going to criminalize any woman that basically travels across state lines to seek an abortion. Right. So that's the thing here. That's what makes this all very murky. Is it today's decision didn't ban crossing state lines to seek a safe abortion.
Malik Abdul, I want to go back just one step here and look at some of the justices who have voted to overturn the ruling and look at what they said during their confirmation hearings in the United States Senate. Let's listen to what some of them said at that time, and then I have a question on that.
I can't pre-commit or say, yes, I'm going in with some agenda, because I'm not. I don't have any agenda. I have no agenda to try to overrule Casey. I have an agenda to stick to the rule of law and decide cases as they come.
And one of the important things to keep in mind about Roe v. Wade is that it has been reaffirmed many times over the past 45 years, as you know. And most prominently, most importantly, reaffirmed in Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992.
So, Malik, there we heard from Amy Coney Barrett as well as Brett Kavanaugh. And in this latest ruling, I'm going to read you part of what this latest ruling said. It said in part, Roe was egregiously wrong and on a collision course with the Constitution from the day it was decided. Were these justices, in view of what they said at that time, and in view of what the court has said now, actually being dishonest at that time?
I think there is a bit of misunderstanding or mischaracterization of those particular points. What Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Coney Barrett said really is consistent with what every Supreme Court nominee says when they get in those hearings. They never commit to what they will do on any case, and I don't think that they actually can. I think it may be illegal for them to actually commit on what they would do in exchange for a vote. What they said is that essentially they respect the precedent that Roe is, but we know even in cases like Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court does have a history of overturning precedent. So that's what Kavanaugh and Justice Barrett were actually referring to. I don't think it's inconsistent, even though there's been a lot of criticism behind with those two particular statements, with those two particular justices claiming that somehow they, and in fact, politicians were coming out saying that they were actually lying about that. But I don't think that they've said anything that's inconsistent with what previous nominees have actually said. And I think that makes sense. On the subject of Roe itself, you'll be hard-pressed to find much agreement when it comes to people who are pro-life and pro-choice. But this is a position that conservatives have actually had for a while. And remember, it was Justice Ginsburg herself, the late Justice Ginsburg herself, who talked about the shaky ground on which Roe was actually founded. So it wasn't as if Roe was settled law in the sense of precedent, but many justices and many legal scholars have always talked about the fact that it was really done on shaky ground. So this is really a culmination of all of those efforts in a different interpretation of the law that the liberals justices on the court do not have.
Joseph Williams, the United States Supreme Court is saying that the right to an abortion is not in the Constitution, but the right to privacy is in the 14th Amendment. And isn't having an abortion an act of privacy? I mean, is that what it comes down to? Does this decision come down to syntax?
It comes down to syntax, much like the syntax was of those clips that you played. They're parsing the language really, really narrowly. I mean, they're slicing it so thin you can almost see through it. Clearly, everyone knew going in that these justices, all three of them, had histories of being hostile to reproductive rights, and they kind of parsed and fudged and weaved and dodged in order to get past the headlines. But pretty much everyone in that committee hearing knew that these three were intent on overturning Roe. Former President Trump said so when he nominated them, that I am committed to finding justices who will overturn Roe. I don't know how much plainer you can make it. Certainly, it was for the record that they were parsing and kind of bobbing and weaving. But you know, the outcome is clear, and the outcome was predicted as soon as Amy Coney Barrett donned her first robe. The problem here is that it opens up a whole can of worms. You asked earlier about legal problems. Mm-hmm. You know, there are going to be legal problems because many states with anti-abortion laws kept it intentionally vague to determine whether or not a mother's life is going to be in danger. We don't know exactly what point that is. The other states have kept laws vague about whether or not they're going to criminalize people who travel from one state to another to get an abortion. And the ruling by Justice Thomas, served up by Justice Alito, basically throws into question a lot of other privacy concerns, including the other ones that you talked about in your intro, such as the right to gay marriage, such as the right to interracial marriage. All of those are now into question because the justices put the 14th Amendment and the privacy rights upon which Roe was founded 50 years ago back into play, and it's uncertain where we're headed now from here.
Malik Abdul, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, does this decision tell us what the court might do with other rulings in the past, like the things that Joseph Williams just mentioned?
Well, it only really matters if we listen to what the justices themselves said. Justice Alito, in response to that specific question or concern that Justice Thomas raised about whether or not this would apply to gay marriage and things like that, Justice Alito actually came out and explicitly said that nothing in the decision would influence those particular laws. And what they made a distinction is that when we're talking about the 14th Amendment, even the idea of privacy, there was another, I guess you could say, body involved in that. So the issue of gay marriage, that's not the same issue as what the justices were referring to or conservatives refer to in the opposition to Roe. And as far as the courts being political, the courts have been political ever since I've been following them. But I think it's important for people to understand that that whole politicization of the court really matters if you're in opposition to what the majority said. If it was a majority opinion in the other direction, conservatives would have been saying that it was a politicized court. And so it's the same thing that's happening now now that liberals or Democrats are in opposition to it.
Okay, Eleanor, do you think that this ruling, this decision, will have a broader impact on women's rights in the United States?
Well, first of all, it's politically out of step, not just with Democrats, but with the broader public. Republicans are not happy with this decision either. The politicization occurs when you have a body of 9 justices that is so out of touch with where the country is. That's the politicization. So where does this take us? I think we're going to see a lot of discussion about the tyranny of the minority of the Supreme Court that is out of kilter again with where the country is, of a Senate which has 2 senators for Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, with minimal populations, and 2 senators in California, which has 40 million people. So this inequality is causing a lot of anger in the country, and we have this wave of kind of political violence undercurrent that's also happening at the same time. So I think the court has just thrown a pile of kerosene out into the country, and I am not sure how people are going to respond. It's very, very fragile, our democracy right now.
Rena, what kind of risks does this decision pose for maternal health care and indeed for women's mortality?
Well, not all abortions are about, are centered on unintended pregnancies. A great many abortions are simply about miscarriages, truly about keeping the mother's life safe and making sure she makes it through. Ectopic pregnancies are another instance in which an abortion is needed. Spontaneous abortion is how a miscarriage is actually classified as medically. So there's just going to be, my gosh, there's got to be a lot of education, number one, because even as an American woman, I can tell you there's so much that we are taught differently, and it's state to state. I grew up in a very rural red state, West Virginia, for example, and that also leaves me with the question of what is the education going to be like for children in schools, state to state? Is it going to be abstinence only? What are we doing here with American children who are of reproductive age? And so this is truly about a moment where I hope more men join as allies and start to look at American women differently, because what today's decision did, in my opinion, is made it so that American women are actually second-class citizens. Because when body autonomy is taken away, that's really right there. You're leaving the door open to anything happening, and then again, it sort of invades this right to privacy that we talk about. Even as conservatives, when the Affordable Care Act was being debated in Congress, I was an aide to a Republican member of Congress. Privacy, the relationship between a person and their doctor was so huge. Well, what did today's decision do? It made it so that it's no longer a decision just between a woman and her doctor. The state is now involved in such a way that I never imagined. And my daughters, I have 3 daughters, they now have less rights than I did at their age.
Joseph Williams, as we heard earlier on, there are 13 states that have so-called trigger laws that have been put in place, and they will kick in once the Supreme Court ruling was handed down. In fact, as we just heard, West Virginia, for instance, is already banning abortions. But other states around the country said that they will protect the rights of women to have abortion. So where do you see this going? I mean, where does the country go with this? Is this going to deepen the divide, the political divide, even more? Is it going to be, again, blue versus red?
Well, it's hard to imagine how it's going to get any more divisive, but I certainly think we're headed in that direction. And I think it's no irony that a lot of the states that have trigger laws are Sunbelt states, and also among the poorest in the nation, which to me just kind of boggles my mind that Mississippi had one abortion clinic, even though it leads the nation in child poverty, it leads the nation in poverty in general, and it's one of the leaders in the nation of Black female mortality during childbirth. It's amazing that states that have these kind of statistics are the ones that had trigger laws that would click in almost automatically as soon as they knew this thing was coming. And they are states where women and young girls and even some men have high rates of sexually transmitted diseases, mainly because these abortion clinics not only provided reproductive rights, but they also provided rights for people or free healthcare, free reproductive healthcare for a lot of people who couldn't afford it. I think the divide will deepen. I think women of means will still be able to get abortions, even if they live in Louisiana, Mississippi, or elsewhere. I think that poor women will be impacted the most. I think poor Black women will have the biggest burden through this particular ruling. And I think it's going to certainly hasten whatever division that we already have. It's going to hasten it, if not completely calcify it.
Okay, Malik, what do we make of the fact that this ruling by the court is totally out of step with the majority view and opinion in this country?
Well, I think that, and one of the things that we need to be mindful of when we're talking about how well or how not so well things poll is that the question that is typically asked is whether or not you support Roe. And I think there is an overwhelming majority of Americans do say that they support Roe. If you start getting into those other questions on what type of restrictions people would go for when it comes to abortion, that number actually goes down. So the idea that the court did something that didn't poll well amongst the American people, it's not something that totally surprises me, but I'm not exactly jarred by the court making that sort of decision. As I said, for conservatives, this was a matter of life. It wasn't a matter of a woman's health. It wasn't a matter of women, of the men trying to take something away from women or anything like that. It was a matter of life. And so you cannot convince conservatives that somehow abortion, when we're talking about the life, an actual child, it's hard to convince conservatives that somehow the courts erred. And they're pretty happy with the court's decision here.
Okay, Judge Williams, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I was going to say two things. I mean, A, we're not talking about an actual child here. We're talking about a collection of cells in many cases. We aren't talking about 9-month abortions. We aren't talking about abortions even after 6 months. And restrictions are not the same as a total outright ban. Yes, people do have different ideas on when abortion is appropriate, but an outright ban is not one of them.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
President Xi Jinping pledges an additional $1 billion to developing countries. We'll have the highlights from the high-level dialogue on global development and BRICS summit. A nation divided, America's top court overturns a 50-year-old constitutional right to abortion. And a setback for Ukrainian forces in the battle for a key city in the east.
Live from Washington, this is The World Today.
Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Sally Ihan in Washington, D.C. Chinese President Xi Jinping has pledged an additional $1 billion to developing countries. It came during a virtual address to the high-level dialogue on global development. Dong Shui has the latest.
Chinese President Xi Jinping said that China would take concrete actions to continue its support for the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a global framework which is centered on 17 goals, including the eradication of poverty and an end to environmental degradation. President Xi was addressing a high-level dialogue on global development, which was part of this week's BRICS summit. He said only through continuous development can social stability and people's dream of a better life be realized. Cooperation can lead to achievements, he said, adding that both developed and developing countries need more of it in order to build a united, equal, and balanced global partnership. Besides the BRICS nations, leaders from 18 countries, including Argentina, Thailand, and Fiji, took part. Last year, China proposed the Global Development Initiative to the UN General Assembly with the aim of providing an international cooperation platform to support developing countries, especially those hit hard with the pandemic. President Xi said that China was ready to work with its BRICS partners to advance that initiative, push forward the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and provide support for global development that is stronger, greener, and healthier. The BRICS members represent more than 40% of the world's population, nearly a quarter of the world's GDP, and 20% of global trade, a strong force among developing countries to contribute to international governance. President Xi said that China would continue to provide financial assistance to developing countries around the world. One way it would do is to upgrade the South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund to what's called a Global Development and South-South Cooperation Fund, and add $1 billion to the fund on top of the $3 billion it's already committed. With the world facing a wide range of challenges from the conflict between Russia and Ukraine to COVID-19 pandemic, leaders at the BRICS summit said the unity and cooperation are needed more than ever for a greater global development, and emphasizing that the developing countries can bring a strong force and different voices to international community. Dong Xue, CGTN, Beijing.
China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi used the forum to highlight the important role played by BRICS Plus, which partners the BRICS members with emerging market countries. He said Beijing will actively promote the expansion of BRICS and welcome more global partners to join the group.
The cooperation of BRICS Plus represents a group comprised of developing countries. Every country is entitled to development, and for developing countries, growth begins in the emerging markets like BRICS. Although we have geological and cultural differences, we share the same values in boosting growth, defending our respective rights, and increasing our status in global governance.
A stunning blow to women's reproductive rights in the US. The Supreme Court has overturned a landmark decision which guaranteed a constitutional right to an abortion for 50 years. Now, abortion rights will be left up to individual states to decide. CGTN's Nathan King is outside the Supreme Court with more on the significance of all of this. Nathan, demonstrators have been out and about there since this was announced, and emotions are certainly running high. What are some of the reactions you've been getting from people there?
Well, as you can imagine, this is a very dark day for people who thought abortion rights were one of the hard-won battles that women have got over the last 50 years or so, and then delight from conservatives. I can tell you tears were seen on both sides, and this continues right now behind me here at the Supreme Court. Let's listen to some of those who are celebrating and some of those who are angry.
I am here celebrating the fall of Roe v. Wade. This was one of the greatest injustices of human history, and I am just so grateful to be here today. And the journey and the work of the pro-life movement is not over. It's really just beginning.
Eventually, Roe v. Wade is gone now, and so eventually we'll be able to have abortion made illegal and unthinkable in America. And from there, then we just grow. And we want to make every person realize the value of the preborn.
It was very disappointing, but not surprising. It took me a second to fully process it because I did see it coming, but like nothing really prepares you for how you're going to feel when the news finally does break.
So now they're passing down legislation that only a very small group of people support. Not the people. It's not for the people. It's not by the people. It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, but the Supreme Court justice ruled 6-3 on this, despite the 3 justices that were appointed by Donald Trump saying in their confirmation hearings that they thought Roe versus Wade was settled law. Well, a couple of years later, they are basically throwing it out. 50 years of precedent in the majority ruling. Judge Alito, whose draft decision was leaked just, about 6 to 8 weeks ago, basically said that Roe versus Wade was erroneously decided. There's no constitutional right in the Constitution of the U.S. to abortion. There's not a lot of other things in there as well, but that's beside the point, and that it should be thrown out. So this goes back to the states. As you heard from the demonstrators there is going to be a huge fight, and the battle lines are being drawn. Let's listen to President Biden's disappointed reaction.
Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
Divided country, divided court, although the dissenting minority, just 3 justices, wrote a stinging indictment of the rest of the court. Let me read it to you. It says, with sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent. Quite an amazing dissent there, quite an incredible decision considering it was largely considered settled law. I can tell you conservatives, cultural conservatives are celebrating here behind me this evening, while liberals and women's rights campaigners and, of course, pro-abortion campaigners are very disappointed.
And Nathan, now that a decision has been made, where do things go from here?
Well, throwing it back to the states actually triggered abortion being banned in 3 states immediately. A lot of these states, especially Republican ones, have trigger laws all ready to go in place if Roe versus Wade was overturned. We expect probably maybe half the U.S. states, maybe even more, will basically ban abortion. Then there's about 15 or so states that will try and widen a woman's right to choose. That will lead potentially to people crossing state lines to get abortion treatment. It's going to be a mess. Deeply divided country in so many other ways. This is just going to add to it as well. And, you know, in the majority opinion, Alito wrote that, look, this is just an exception. But one justice, Clarence Thomas, perhaps the most conservative, said, look, if Roe versus Wade was decided wrongly, then perhaps the right to contraception was argued wrongly, and even same-sex marriage. The cultural wars in this country, whether it comes to abortion or gay marriage or rights that many people thought were settled, are still raging strong.
All right, Nathan, we'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks for that. Nathan King for us there. In California, abortion will continue to be protected under state law, and those rights will likely be expanded. Mark New is in San Francisco to gauge reaction there.
I'm here outside San Francisco City Hall, where people will be protesting about the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Now, California is a state where the law grants anyone of reproductive age the right to choose to bear children or to have an abortion. Minors do not have to have their parents' consent. Now, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the University of California, Los Angeles estimates that between 8,000 to 16,000 more women will travel to the state of California to receive abortion care. I spoke to local residents about that potential impact.
people inevitably will start coming to California in order to access abortion rights. And I want to make sure that our community is still protected as opposed to kind of being exploited for what I kind of foresee is going to be a potential opportunity to make profit.
I mean, I think we just welcome them. They're refugees. They're refugees. That's what we need to do. We'll pick up the slack. Pay taxes. We'll do what we need to.
In a way, California would be picking up the tab for other states, right?
Yeah, I mean, in effect, that will be the case, which is a whole nother set of legislative problems that I'm sure will come up. It unfairly redistributes the burden of that healthcare to states that are still, pro-women.
The state of California has been preparing for this decision and somewhat embracing its role as a sanctuary state for abortion care. In fact, just last week, the legislature sent Governor Gavin Newsom a budget that included $20 million to cover airfare, lodging, and gas for women traveling from other states to get abortion care in California. Earlier this month, a constitutional amendment was introduced in the state Senate that will actually enshrine the protections in California in the state constitution. That must pass the state Senate and state assembly first before it will be put on a statewide ballot in November. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
Jennifer Knight joins me from Lansing in the state of Michigan. She's an abortion rights activist. Jennifer, thank you for your time. Obviously, now that a decision has been made, there are lots of very complex issues on the table. Just walk us through some of the potential implications for women in a post-Roe America.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a very grim situation for abortion seekers going forward. We're looking at people having to possibly cross state lines, as was previously mentioned, sometimes up to thousands of miles, take time off work, and risking their health in order to seek a very necessary piece of reproductive, healthcare, reproductive justice.
And obviously women will be doing that so that they're not prosecuted in their home states. Now, when women do travel, what is that going to mean for the clinics that are supporting them? I mean, we're talking about thousands of women potentially who would otherwise be criminalised in their home states, travelling to these various clinics. And as we just heard in that report earlier, there are a whole host of legislative concerns here in terms of redistributing the burden of healthcare. How are these kind of clinics that often run on a shoestring budget going to cope with these women that are likely going to be heading there?
Well, that is one of the biggest concerns for abortion advocates right now is that, the burden on these, clinics will already compound, right? They're already operating often on a very, very tight budget and, with staff that obviously believe in it. But yeah, they will have to care for patients out of state if those patients can even get out of state. Because that is one of the trigger laws that is written in some of these states is that, they have criminalized even leaving the state to seek medical care.
And of course, a move like this affects the poor and minorities first and the most. Half of the black population in the US lives in the South, the states, of course, with the strictest laws. Talk us through the broader reproductive implications for women there. If more women are going to be having babies, what conversations need to be had about better natal care, better childcare, that sort of thing?
Those are precisely the conversations that we need to be having about better natal care and better maternal leave, parental leave altogether, and altogether, supporting the impoverished and supporting people, of less means. Many of our abortion talking points come from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and so much of my, my activism centers on the ideas and the concepts coming out of that part of the country.
Now, President Joe Biden has said he will fight to protect what rights women have, like the freedom to travel and access medications, to end early pregnancies. How far can the administration actually go to protect these rights? And what can Congress do to try and back it up?
Yeah, I think that it remains to be seen. I'm not sure of how enforceable those laws will be, or exactly how they plan to. Obviously, we know that our cell phones have tracking data. We know that there's any number of ways to, run into legal trouble. But I'm not sure how it is that the federal government plans to protect women from some of the state, legislation that could harm them.
I really appreciate your time, Jennifer. Thank you very much for that. Jennifer Knight there for us.
Thank you.
The US Congress has approved its first new restrictions on gun ownership in nearly 30 years. The move comes exactly 1 month after 19 children and 2 teachers were killed in a school shooting in Texas. While supporters are applauding the move, gun rights groups say it's the first step towards eliminating their right to own weapons. Nick Harper has the details.
In America, the issue of guns triggers strong emotions.
Gun control!
Advocates have campaigned for years to tighten restrictions. Those calls getting louder following mass shootings last month at a Texas elementary school and a New York supermarket.
The yeas are 65, the nays are 33. The motion to concur with an amendment is agreed to.
Now, a set of proposals has achieved bipartisan compromise.
This is not a cure-all for all the ways gun violence affects our nation, but it is a long overdue step in the right direction. Passing this gun safety bill is truly significant, and it's going to save lives.
The bill includes enhanced background checks to bar known domestic abusers or those who committed significant crimes as juveniles from buying a gun. There's more funding for school security and mental health services, and provisions to encourage more states to adopt so-called red flag laws that prevent people deemed a threat to themselves or others from buying firearms. Measures welcomed by gun control advocates.
What we see in this moment is Republicans really hearing from their constituents as well and feeling compelled that they have got to do something, because we can't wait another 10 years of inaction to continue to see day in and day out the horrific levels of gun violence we see.
The compromise comes with political risk, especially for Republicans supporting the bill. Gun-owning voters see it as a slippery slope to more restrictions.
That should be a huge red flag for Republican voters going into the fall. Democrats are going to come back for more. So, just because they're framing this as a modest deal doesn't mean this is the last bite at the apple.
But as Congress tightens gun laws, the Supreme Court has loosened them. Thursday, it overturned New York legislation that restricted people carrying concealed handguns in public. The new legislation may provide a measure of comfort for families impacted by gun violence, but it still falls short of the president's wish list. He'd urged lawmakers to reimpose a ban on assault weapons and outlaw high-capacity magazines. But those were proposals that Republican leaders were unwilling to support. Nick Harper, CGTN, Washington.
Afghanistan is holding mass burials for the victims of Wednesday's earthquake. More than 1,100 people died. Many of them were children. Aid from around the world is starting to arrive in the disaster zone, a remote mountainous region near the border with Pakistan. Planes filled with supplies from India, Iran and the United Arab Emirates on the ground. And China announced it will send assistance in the form of cash, tents, quilts and more. The EU has approved an additional $9.5 million in financial aid for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia says its forces have taken 2 more towns near Severodonetsk and surrounded 2,000 Ukrainian troops. And after a series of battles in the east, Ukraine is withdrawing from one of its last major strongholds. Associated Press reporter Kieran McQuillan reports from Lviv.
After weeks of resisting severe and continuous Russian bombardment in the city of Severodonetsk, the order came for Ukrainian forces to retreat from the ruins of that city. The regional governor, Serhiy Haidai, said that 80% of the buildings in the city were beyond use. He said that there was no point defending a city that had been pulverized beyond recognition. A Ukrainian lawmaker said the decision was made not to repeat the tragedy of Mariupol, and to ensure that the capable Ukrainian forces would not end up as prisoners of war. Ukrainian media said the pullback started last night before the news became public. The 3 bridges which connect Severodonetsk to its twin city on the other side of the river, Lysychansk, are now blown down. And the question remains about the estimated 5,000 to 6,000 civilians still left in the city, and also the 500 who were sheltering in the Azot chemical plant with the Ukrainian forces. There are more headwinds facing the Ukrainians as they struggle to hold on to the last remaining territory in Luhansk. Russian forces continue to advance to the south of the city of Lysychansk. The towns of Hirske and Zoloty fell to Russia today, and Lysychansk is now surrounded on all 3 sides by Russian forces and becomes the new focus of their bombardment. Meantime, a Ukrainian official in the Russian-occupied city of Kherson was killed in an explosion today. Dmitry Salvuchenko was the head of the Family's Youth and Sport Division of the Russian-backed Kherson Military Civilian Administration. He was killed when his car exploded in an apparent car bomb attack. A Ukrainian official said this was, quote, the successful work of partisans. Now, Kherson was one of the first major Ukrainian cities to be occupied by Russian forces at the beginning of this invasion. Civilian protests against the occupation were put down in the early days, and since then there have been unconfirmed reports of partisan activity throughout the region. For CGTN, this is Kieran McQuillan of Associated Press in Lviv, Western Ukraine.
Meanwhile, EU leaders have met in Brussels to discuss the economic impact of the conflict in Ukraine. The 27-nation bloc say they're preparing for further cuts in Russian gas. German Chancellor Scholz warned that Europe needs to ramp up efforts to cut its dependency on Russian fossil fuel imports. Key among the challenges facing the EU, how to manage soaring inflation while finding alternative energy supplies. Still ahead on the world today, ice hockey's popular image might be big burly men missing teeth and always ready to trade blows. But that's changing. Girls are increasingly drawn to the sport. Details just ahead.
Degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. Biz Talk, only on CGTN. Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
We are CGTN, China Global Television Network.
We're just minutes away from the puck drop of Game 5 of the National Hockey League Championship. The Colorado Avalanche could host the Stanley Cup at home if they win. Otherwise, the best-of-7 series against two-time defending champs, the Tampa Bay Lightning, will return to Florida. As Hendrik Sedbrandi reports, the contest is sparking interest in amateur hockey.
Anticipation is high here in Colorado for Game 5. These Stanley Cup finals have already provided some thrilling moments. They've also brought valuable exposure for a sport that's drawing more and more participants, particularly women. In Superior, Colorado, ice hockey players ages 10 to 17 participate in a power skating clinic. This is a co-ed gathering. Some people may not realize that girls hockey is more popular than ever.
It's growing. I think they say it's like the fastest growing sport in America at this point.
Chris Lockram runs and coaches various amateur hockey programs, including the Lady Rough Riders. Renee Limpus and Kaya Carlson are two of the team's key players.
I like the teamwork, the competitiveness. I've met such a great group of girls playing.
I think it's a growing game for girls. There's a professional league for it now. There's more college teams coming up with it every single year.
It wasn't always this way. Ice hockey has a reputation for being a hard-hitting, no-holds-barred, bare-knuckled kind of sport. But things have changed over time.
It's evolved. It's become more of a skill and finesse game than it used to be.
More girls and women, whether in recreational leagues or club or college programs, have been drawn to the ice along the way.
I feel like we work on shooting and stick handling more because you have like maybe more time and space and less body contact than the boys, so you can be a little bit more like creative out there.
It's the fastest demographic when it comes to growth in hockey.
Jason Schofield runs amateur hockey development for the Colorado Avalanche.
I would argue that you could call it smarter hockey. The way that they can move the puck and work together and communicate, it takes the physicality out of it, to be honest with you. It's a sport about grit and determination, and I think women have that in a very, very basic, strong way.
With a roughly 30% female participation rate, many women still have to travel to find competition. But more girls are starting ice hockey at a younger age. 9-year-old Kate Schofield is a prime example.
I like the skating and being in a hockey rink.
They're just as skilled, if not more skilled than some of the boys playing hockey. So the gap is closing, and the opportunity for girls is just going to continue to increase.
Meantime, ice hockey remains a physical sport. There's fighting at the amateur level, even in the women's game.
And then the funny thing is, just like men's, you'll see that, and then they're hanging out, having a good time together in the parking lot.
For members of the Lady Rough Riders, recent national champions in their division, ice hockey is now firmly in their blood.
For me, it's the best sport you can play. I love it. It's my passion. I'm going to play it as long as I can, even if I end up in beer league. Still be playing.
The Colorado Avalanche has supported the growth and development of youth ice hockey for years now, believing that it helps build the sport and creates lifelong fans. Not surprisingly, those involved with Colorado amateur hockey have seen an upsurge in interest now that their team is in the Stanley Cup Finals. Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Denver.
And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Sally Ihun.
U.S. Supreme Court upends 50 years of reproductive rights for women. Hello, I'm Gerald Tan in Washington, D.C. Also coming up on Global Business, BRICS nations agree on supporting reform for the World Trade Organization, and Japanese carmaker Toyota announces a recall for its new electric vehicles launched just 2 months ago. Now, it is an unprecedented day as millions of women in America saw a 50-year-old ruling overturned. Roe v. Wade, which gave women the right to an abortion, was overturned in a Supreme Court decision. The ruling was celebrated by pro-lifers and mourned by pro-choice advocates. To go more in depth about what this means, I'm joined by our White House correspondent, Nathan King. Hello there, Nathan.
Hey, Gerald. You can imagine the feeling. I mean, we got that sort of tip-off from the leaked draft ruling from Judge Alito, what, 6 weeks ago or something, and we knew this was coming. But I can tell you, the atmosphere here, just the ruling was ruled out, was really divisive. And immediately we had those who basically think this is America going backwards, that 50 years of constitutionally protected abortion rights and all the health aspects that follow from that have just basically been thrown back to the states, and it's going to be chaos. And then those who have been campaigning for decades, as long as Roe versus Wade has been in, are celebrating. Let's hear from them both.
I am here celebrating the fall of Roe v. Wade. This was one of the greatest injustices of human history, and I am just so grateful to be here today. And the journey and the work of the pro-life movement is not over. It's really just beginning.
Eventually, Roe v. Wade is gone now, and so eventually we'll be able to have abortion made illegal and unthinkable in America. And from there, then we just grow. And we want to make every person realize the value of the preborn.
It was very disappointing, but not surprising. It took me a second to fully process it because I did see it coming, but like nothing really prepares you for how you're going to feel when the news finally does break.
So now they're passing down legislation that only a very small group of people support. Not the people. It's not for the people. It's not by the people. It doesn't even make sense.
So the majority, 6-3, said that Roe versus Wade was erroneously decided back in 1973 and essentially threw it out. Despite all the precedent, the Supreme Court nominees have basically, Supreme Court justices have backed it time and time again. But remember, there were 3 new justices on this court, a big conservative majority, all appointed by Donald Trump in his one term. And all of them, when they were going through their confirmation here, and said, well, it's pretty much settled law. Well, it's not now. They've thrown it out, and that was a big fear. And reacting to this, Democrats, led by U.S. President Biden, say it's a dark day for women's rights in America.
Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it. They simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
Yeah, in his dissenting opinion, the 3 justices on the liberal side of the court wrote a scathing opinion saying, with sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent. But one of the most conservative, Justice Clarence Thomas, said, look, now we've thrown Roe versus Wade out, maybe we should look at other things that he thinks were erroneously decided, like the access to contraception and even gay marriage. Quite incredible stuff.
And that is our Nathan King reporting on a watershed moment in the United States. Thanks very much, Nathan. In California, abortion will continue to be protected under state law, and those rights will likely be expanded. Mark News in San Francisco to gauge reaction.
I'm here outside San Francisco City Hall, where people will be protesting about the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Now, California is a state where the law grants anyone of reproductive age the right to choose to bear children or to have an abortion. Minors do not have to have their parents' consent. Now, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, The University of California, Los Angeles estimates that between 8,000 to 16,000 more women will travel to the state of California to receive abortion care. I spoke to local residents about that potential impact.
People inevitably will start coming to California in order to access abortion rights. And I want to make sure that our community is still protected as opposed to kind of being exploited for what I kind of foresee is going to be a potential opportunity to make profit.
I mean, I think we just welcome them. They're refugees. They're refugees. That's what we need to do. We'll pick up the slack. Pay taxes. We'll do what we need to.
In a way, California would be picking up the tab for other states, right?
Yeah, I mean, in effect, that will be the case, which is a whole nother set of legislative problems that I'm sure will come up. Yeah, it unfairly redistributes the burden of that health care to states that are still, pro-women.
The state of California has been preparing for this decision and somewhat embracing its role as a sanctuary state for abortion care. In fact, just last week, the legislature sent Governor Gavin Newsom a budget that included $20 million to cover airfare, lodging, and gas for women traveling from other states to get abortion care in California. Earlier this month, a constitutional amendment was introduced in the state Senate that will actually enshrine the protections in California in the state constitution. That must pass the state Senate and state assembly first before it will be put on a statewide ballot in November. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
All right, moving along, let's check in now on how global stocks have been doing this Friday. William Denslow has a wrap from the New York Stock Exchange.
Last week, US stocks posted its worst week since 2020. There was somewhat of a turnaround this week, though, and a strong day of gains to close the week on Friday. The Dow Jones closing up 2.7%, the S&P up 3.1%, with the Nasdaq closing up 3.3%. It was a particularly good day for cruise lines, this especially after Carnival announced that they'd received nearly twice as many bookings this quarter as they did in the quarter previous. That company closed up around 12% on that news. Over in Europe, it was much the same story, positive sentiment closing out the week on Friday. The FTSE closing up 2.7%, the DAX 1.6%, the CAC over in France closing up 3.2%. Now, here in the US, there was some disappointing economic data when it came to consumer sentiment, hitting a record low. However, if traders looked a little bit further into that bit of data, it showed that 12-month inflation expectations actually ticked down ever so slightly. Of course, the big story for US investors over the past few months has been inflation, so any sign that it's trending downwards is very welcome news indeed. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
A staggering $100 million worth of cryptocurrency has been stolen in a major hack. Thieves stole the digital coins from Horizon, a so-called blockchain bridge developed by startup Harmony. Bridges allow users to transfer tokens from one blockchain to another. They've become a target for hackers due to vulnerabilities in their code. This heist follows a series of similar attacks on blockchain bridges, including the $600 million Ronin network heist and the $320 million stolen from Wormhole. Harmony has yet to say exactly how the funds were stolen. Well, the esports gaming industry has enjoyed incredible growth in the last few years, and experts are predicting further substantial growth. But that's not all that's exciting investors, as CGTN's Dan Williams found out at the Collision Tech Conference in Toronto.
3, 2, 1.
Tech has made gigantic leaps forward in recent years, perhaps none more so than in gaming. The rapid growth in esports has seen the sector blossom into a $2 billion industry, with experts predicting growth of 20% per year each year for at least the rest of this decade. Justin Kenner is the CEO of GameSquare Esports, one of several esports and gaming companies to participate at this week's Collision Conference in Toronto.
People talk about this industry and this huge growth like it's kind of a flash in the pan, and I mean, if you look at the audience numbers, that's not the case, right? We are at the very early stages of this is the future of sport.
Kenner predicts changes to the market, not least in how games are developed.
Publishers are going to work a lot closer with the team owners, with brands, to really promote the game, the industry, and all actually share in the revenue together.
It's not just esports that have enjoyed success in the gaming space in recent years. Tabletop gaming or board games have also enjoyed a resurgence, with experts predicting more growth in the future. Elan Lee is the co-creator and CEO of Exploding Kittens. After initially seeking $10,000 through Kickstarter, an online fundraising platform for creative projects, the Exploding Kittens campaign raised more than $8 million in 30 days.
I would take sticky notes and put them on my computer monitor so that they would obscure the number of backers that we had, because it was terrifying to me. I was looking at that number as, that's another game we got to make and put in a box and then put on a truck and then somehow get it to your house.
Lee says for new games to be successful, they need to meet the demands of the market.
That audience just keeps growing. And I think the reason it keeps growing is because those people suddenly have permission to be gamers. They don't want to devote 20 hours to mastering a game or even reading an instruction set. They want to sit down, open a box, and experience a dopamine rush with their friends.
Whether electronic or traditional, it would appear our appetite for gaming is stronger than ever. Dan Williams, CGTN, Toronto, Canada.
Well, coming up, CGTN speaks to the Chinese Vice Commerce Minister as the BRICS summit comes to a close. Stay tuned for that and much more.